also my honor and pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Louis Branco is, as you can see from the slide, the co-founder of Zalgen Labs, housed in the Germantown Innovation Center. That's the second floor of the PK building. For those of you who didn't know, we had active biotechnology research going on the campus in a capacity other than teaching. He is also the program director at Autoimmune Technologies. Dr. Branco has over 18 years of research and development experience in the fields of molecular biology, immunology, virology, and cell biology, particularly in the design and implementation of bacterial, baculoviral, and mammalian expression systems for the production of recombinant therapeutic molecules. And for those of you who aren't sure what all of that is, stay tuned. Some of it will be explained, and some of it you'll be learning in classes here, I suspect. Dr. Branco earned his Bachelor of Science in Microbiology from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and his Doctorate of Biomedical Sciences in Virology from Tulane University School of Medicine. Dr. Branco has been directly involved in the development of licensed antibody therapeutics such as MedImmune's flagship product Synagis, Human Genome Sciences, Benlysta, and Abtrax, as well as additional antibodies under clinical evaluation with both of these companies. Dr. Branco co-founded BioFutura, a biotech company that is dedicated to the development of therapeutics for biodefense. There he served as the chief scientific officer. Additionally, Dr. Branco invented a novel mammalian cell-based biomanufacturing system that is used in the production of Zalgen's products. At Zalgen Labs, Dr. Branco oversees critical aspects of recombinant protein expression, purification, and validation, human monoclonal antibody immunotherapeutic development, procurement of highly relevant human serum samples from acute and convalescent patient sera for diagnostic, therapeutic, and vaccine characterization studies, new vaccine platforms with design elements conducive to vaccination campaigns in austere environments, and logistics and research support in West Africa. Since 2008, Dr. Branco has been actively directing research and design aspects of the Viral Hemorrhagic Fever Consortium's Lassa Fever program. He and his team have essentially rebuilt the lab capacity at the Kanema Government Hospital site in Sierra Leone and worked on Lassa fever there until the Ebola outbreak hit the region. During the 2014-2015 outbreak, Dr. Branco traveled to West Africa to lend firsthand expertise in logistics, diagnostics, and medical support. It is with great pleasure that I welcome and introduce you to Dr. Louis Branco.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to see you all here today. I must start by saying that this is not going to be the type of symposium that I usually would be presenting. Today, we are going to talk about Ebola and other pandemic diseases, but rather than a heavy scientific type of talk, we're going to talk about the economic, social, and political impact on West African nations. I'd like to thank Joan Naik, who's about to slip out the door. I know she's very busy, and thank you for your invitation to come out and address the Montgomery College community, and congratulations on your new post as interim vice president and provost of the Rockville campus. I'm sure it's well deserved. Joan invited me to talk to her class, one of her classes last semester, and then we segued into this talk here today. I would like to also acknowledge that programs and challenges and outcomes and successes like what I'm going to show here today are not done by one person. So when you look at me today, please understand that we are talking about dozens and people in the United States and hundreds throughout the world who make this happen. 3 of them are right here. I hope not to embarrass them. Anatoly Koval, Megan Heinrich, and Megan Rowland were some of the most amazingly dedicated scientists that you can ever hope to meet, and these are the people who actually make things happen. So when we talk about these successful diagnostics and vaccines and everything else that we do, these are the people who make it happen. So let's get going here. As I stated, commonly my presentation would focus on a lot of science. I would be showing and talking about molecular structures of proteins important in the virus biology. patient care, protein expression, rapid diagnostic tests, immunoassays, high containment laboratories where we do our work, public health units, logistics and resources, assay development, assay validation, all of these really big words and big topics that we commonly describe in talks that we give in science. But today the focus will be on, as I mentioned again, the economic, social, and political impact of Ebola and other pandemic diseases on African nations, with a focus on my personal experiences in Sierra Leone. So when the Ebola outbreak was raging, I kept a watchful eye on the news here stateside, and saw an awful lot of reporting from the trenches in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea, where the outbreak was centered. And of course, the focus was on number of cases, number of people who died, number of infected, and what was being done, what organizations throughout the world were tackling the problem, what was the US doing about it, what was Europe doing about it, what was the world generally doing about it. And very little was actually discussed in terms of how did this impact the region, economically, social, and politically. So I want you to keep an open mind for the rest of this presentation, because some of the things that we're going to show you here today, the statistics and the pictures and the videos, a lot of doom and gloom, it seems, but not really. Keep an open mind, because at the end, that is a message of hope and resiliency, which is really going to be very crucial in getting that region out of the downturn that certainly Ebola caused throughout these three countries. So just to point out, West Africa is shown here on the map. It's 16 countries. I found out that what people generally describe West Africa to be. Sierra Leone is right there in far West Africa, and it is encircled by Guinea on the north and about on the southeast by Liberia. And this right here has been really the epicenter of the Ebola outbreak. There were a few cases that were recorded in southern Mali, not that many, and as you may have heard, there was a flight that carried an individual with an active Ebola infection from Monrovia, Liberia to Lagos, Nigeria, and a few cases were recorded in Nigeria. And that's really about the extent of the Ebola spread throughout West Africa. Here's a map of Sierra Leone. It's maybe about 300 miles north to south and about 250 miles west to east. When we fly into Sierra Leone, the capital is Freetown. Freetown is a beautiful little location, very, very hilly. Therefore, there's really no way to build an airport there. So the airport is here in Lungi, which is flat and across the bay. And commonly, we either take a ferry from Lungi to Freetown and then make our way into Kenema through Bo, or these days a new road will permit us to actually come around, pick up the Freetown to Kenema Road. And this, back in about 2005-06, when this program first started, was easily a 12-hour trip because the roads just were not finished. There were small stretches, but now the road is contiguous from Lungi and or Freetown all the way to Kenema, and this is now an easy 4-hour trip. Freetown is the largest, it's the capital of the country, it's the largest city. The second largest city is Bo, and Kenema is the third largest city in the country. And that is really where we do our work. This region right here, I will talk to you about Lassa fever. It is the most endemic region in the world for Lassa fever, which is another viral hemorrhagic fever that on presentation, you cannot tell them apart from Ebola. Okay, so people that come sick with certain presentation, you look at the symptoms and you cannot tell them if they have Ebola or Lassa. Only through specific diagnostics can you tell the two infections apart. So clearly you can see that a region that deals with 300,000 to 500,000 cases of Lassa fever per year, the last thing that they needed was an Ebola outbreak. And of course, the virus parachuted right on top of this region. It came from Guécadou, right there in Guinea, which is going to be a little off the map here. And then it spread through Koidou and down through Kenema and Bo, and that's really where the outbreak then picked up steam and then moved up north. And our greatest fear was that it would reach Freetown, and it did. So, some facts about Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Common circulating diseases in the area. Lots of hepatitis A, E, typhoid, malaria, dengue, yellow fever, Japanese encephalitis. Africa, trypanosomiasis, cutaneous leishmaniasis, plague, tuberculosis, cholera, HIV, measles, polio. I'm out of breath. Lassa fever, and now Ebola, okay? They don't need another one. So other measurable factors, malnutrition rates of about 50%. Mind you that a lot of these statistics, depending on where you get them from, they may be somewhat in the ballpark or completely off, but I can tell you that this is not 5 or 10%, it's probably more than 50. In 2001, the last time that statistics are probably reliable for poverty levels, it was over 50%. Literacy rate about 48. Unemployment and underemployment, there are not even statistics for, and this is just in Sierra Leone. Most people are underemployed, and when you consider employment, you actually consider people who basically just work in the fields for themselves. So work during the day to eat at night. Infant mortality rates, world ranking, Guinea comes in at 29th, Sierra Leone at 11th, and Liberia at 15th. The number is not really a good one. This is out of 184 countries. So the closest you are to number one, the worse off you are. Maternal mortality rate, one of the highest in the world. Female deaths per 100,000 live births. Guinea comes in at 13. Sierra Leone at 5th. And Liberia in 8th. I cannot tell you how horrible it is to work directly across from the maternity ward at Kemen Governor Hospital, and the screams that go on during childbirth. These women give birth without any sort of medical assistance whatsoever, and if they are unfortunate enough to bleed out, then they will bleed to death. There is no way to stop it usually. This area, this region of the world was embroiled in a civil war as late as 2002. Some of us probably remember the Sierra Leone Civil War that started in 1991 and raged for 11 years. It was started by internal rebel groups with support from Liberia. Charles Taylor was the president at the time. He has since been tried at The Hague and is in prison for crimes against humankind. It is suspected that, or we claim, that estimated 50,000 lives that were lost during the war. Many thousand more were maimed and left without the ability to adequately sustain themselves and their families. You look at this child, does not have a hand. The rebels made a point of chopping the hands of many individuals as they waged the war throughout the country. It was a sign of their brutality. Diamonds, which are perhaps Sierra Leone's greatest natural resource, were used to fuel the civil war, were used to buy arms so that fighting could ensue. These diamonds have taken on the name of blood diamonds, and if you remember the Leonardo DiCaprio Blood Diamond movie that came out, and I forget when, but several years ago, probably more than 10 years or so, kind of painted a picture of really what was going on in this region at the time. I told you about Lassa fever. This region is highly affected by Lassa fever. You can even not see the delineation of Sierra Leone, which is right there, with Guinea on top, Liberia on the bottom, and then some spots here all the way through Nigeria. And this, you can see much darker color than anywhere else. It's the most endemic region in the world for Lassa fever. with the other being Nigeria. Estimated 300,000 to 500,000 people each year get affected by this disease in Sierra Leone. Because it is endemic, we tend to really not think about it too much. It does not have the impact that Ebola has because Ebola happens in outbreaks. And I think because Hollywood and just general population at large, the psychology of Ebola is such that it scares people because of its outbreak status. But in this last outbreak, it ended up infecting 20-something thousand people, killing about half of them, so we probably have about 11, 12,000 fatalities. Look at the numbers of Lassa fever. Malaria kills in the millions per year. Nobody really ever talks about the malaria problem. Well, some do, but it's not mainstream media talk because it's endemic, and so we just become desensitized to it and just live with its effects. Our group spent several years in Sierra Leone determining that the early estimates of 5 to 20% mortality rate that had been previously identified through some early studies with less sensitive and specific diagnostics, it was actually rather incorrect. And our 5-year study showed that we just fell short of 70% of the people who come into a hospital with an active Lassa fever infection lose their lives. Lassa fever was first reported in Nigeria in 1969. Somewhere up there in northeastern Nigeria is a town called Lassa, and that's how it took its name. Some more statistics from the World Health Organization on Sierra Leone. It's a population of about 6 million. People live on less than $1 a day. By the way, I am 46 years old. I'm almost 47, which means that in Sierra Leone terms, I'm about to check out. You know, the life expectancy at birth for males and females, starting in 2013, was not beyond 46 years old. The industrialized world, countries like Japan, even in the United States, are now into the low 80s. The probability of dying between the ages of 15 and 60 per 1,000 population is 444 for men, 423 for women, so approaching half. So the probability that you will not see beyond 60 years old is rather high. The Human Development Indices, the United Nations every year comes out with a Human Development Report, and it pretty much ranks countries in terms of their development index, and there's a lot of data that goes into it. But then it ranks the countries in very high development, medium development, low, and very low. It reports on about 188 countries, and look at where the 3 countries affected by the Ebola outbreak lie. Liberia at 177, Sierra Leone at 181, and Guinea at 182. So clearly fall in the very low development index. The gross domestic product per capita, again, you can see that although it's been going up, most countries, unless they are embroiled in a civil war like Syria or Afghanistan, have been going steadily up throughout the last few years. But again, look at the ranks. Out of 185 countries, Guinea at 177, Liberia at 180, and Sierra Leone at 170. So I think this is starting to paint for you a picture of really where these countries stack, at least economically, okay? I have a 2-minute video here that I'm going to show you, and I would like you to really focus in these 2 minutes on looking at the infrastructure. Look at the roads, look at the open sewers, look at the transportation, look at how people do business. This was a video that I took, I believe, in 2009. We were leaving the hospital to go into town to get some lunch, and I just rolled down the window and had my camera just recording throughout, so I think it's about a couple of minutes. Looking at an open sewage system. This is a relatively wealthy town. I'll tell you why.
Are you ready for me? For Freetown?
Thank you.
For Freetown.
Oh, yes, I'm ready.
This is getting into the center of town where the main business district is. So if you can see some of the markets going on. So this is the central market. Just goes for about a mile or so, just small businesses. So you can see the poor infrastructure, you can see the open sewers. One of the positive outcomes of the Ebola outbreak was that there was no cholera really registered in the region that year, just because of the sheer amount of bleach that got poured everywhere. So that was positive, but usually typhoid and cholera are just raging through these towns on the yearly basis. You can see the poor infrastructure. You can see that transportation is by walking, bicycle, a lot of mopeds. That is kind of the equivalent of the public transportation system. People just flag down a moped and get on it, tell where they want to go, and get taken there. Something else that's important to notice is that this is the third largest city in the country, and it's probably probably even wealthier than Freetown. The reason being that Kinema is really where the diamond business, where the diamond industry has its foothold. So a lot of the diamond mines are in districts right outside of Kinema, and all of the diamond dealers have businesses here in Kinema. And so it just does bring in significant amount of wealth. So let's look at the economy. As I mentioned, 16 countries, 3 that were very affected by the Ebola outbreak, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. These West African countries have a large number of expatriates in critical sectors of the economy. So when the Ebola outbreak hit, companies just pulled all their workers out. Clearly, nobody wanted to return their workers to their home countries in body bags, and everybody really got very scared, so they started pulling out. The Chinese have now developed a foothold in West Africa, poured in a lot of resources, have built a lot of the roads and railways, and so have very heavily invested in the region in recent years, and had to pull out a lot of the expatriates from the country as well, which clearly brought some big projects like the Liberia to Guinea road was suspended, and of course that just creates further problems with transportation and delivery of goods and the ability to tackle an Ebola outbreak when it was at its height. There were border closures, so Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, or Ivory Coast, and Ghana closed their borders, and it probably was the smart thing to do because it prevented the spread of the outbreak into these countries. There were travel bans by airlines to the worst affected countries, and of course, the regional trade gets affected the most. Postponement of investments by foreign investors was rampant, and a lot of money just flowed out of the region. Pretty hot spot these days, or prior to the outbreak, for tourism, especially eco-tourism took hold, and it was quite prevalent in Sierra Leone. I visited one site where you can actually live on the beach for about 3 months and help build your own houses and gather your own food, and people pay good money for that. So of course it brings in a lot of revenue for the country, and that clearly went away. Large decline in hotel bookings, airline reservations, and influx of tourists to the region. For a while there, Brussels Airlines was the only commercial airline flying into Sierra Leone during late 2014 and 2015. We actually had to make contingency plans because if while we were in country, Brussels Airlines pulled the plug on flying to and out of Sierra Leone, we were stuck. So we would have to fly out and perhaps US Air Force plane. A country near Guinea, so a little to the west of Sierra Leone and Guinea, it's Senegal, and entrenched there is Gambia, derives 16% of its GDP from tourism. So because even though they were not directly affected, it scared enough people from going to the region to actually reach a drop in revenue of about 60%. Agriculture is a staple in Sierra Leone. Most people work in agriculture because they do grow crops to eat and to trade. So a lot of farmers stayed away from farmlands and markets because those are points of congregation, and they were clearly told by their government to avoid public places and avoid congregation. Concerns arose in the coca trading markets. Sometimes in Kenema, we just see coca beans just spread out over yards and yards as they are drying them for processing. West Africa accounts for 70% of the world's coca production, so clearly that was impacted with rise in prices worldwide for cocoa. These disruptions to these critical sectors of the economy generated a very large fiscal gap, and I isolated fiscal gap because these are economies that don't generally grow at the pace that is sustainable internally, and certainly not on an international level, as I pointed out in previous slides. And this fiscal gap has to be addressed, and how it's going to be a challenge. Overall impact, the International Monetary Fund has reduced growth projections for the region. It may not seem too much here to look for, to 5.5%, but it is very impactful. The World Bank shares the same outlook for the 3 countries, and have warned that the region probably lost about $32 billion in 2015. $32 billion for our economy is really not that much. We're talking about trillions of dollars that we spend in the United States alone every year. Our GDP is enormous, but $32 billion for the region is far more than they can withstand. World Bank again projected GDP growth in Sierra Leone to be down, with agriculture being the most affected sector, with slowdown in mining operations as well. Sierra Leone not only produces diamonds, they produce gold, and they are the largest producer of bauxite in the world. Bauxite is the raw material for aluminum that the world consumes, especially China, at an alarming pace. And the Chinese have a big stake in bauxite mining in Sierra Leone, and of course that contributed to lowering the exports and clearly providing less bauxite to the world. Guinea's growth estimate went down. Liberia also, one of the smallest economies in the world, its projections are reduced. Overall, the World Bank estimated that the Liberian economy declined by $113 million, Sierra Leone's by 95, and Guinea by 120 million. And those are actually very, very large numbers for the region. In social impact, I've got a couple of quotes here. Many children in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone have lost one or both parents to Ebola since the start of the outbreak. It's one of the first obstacles that must be overcome if West Africa is to recover. These children urgently need special attention and support, yet many of them feel unwanted and even abandoned. Orphans are usually taken in by a member of the extended family when both parents succumb. But in some communities, the fear and the stigma surrounding Ebola became stronger than family ties. And that was very true. We have a house in Kenema that Tulane University, known as the Tulane House, that they rent on a long-term basis. And we started housing little kids there because they had nowhere to go. And so it just became an orphanage of sorts. And these kids are now left without a family and without any sort of social fabric and social sort of structure to progress through life. Schools in Sierra Leone closed for 7 months during 2014 and 2015. They had just come out and started to rebuild from the effects of the Civil War. I believe that it was around 2008, 2009, maybe, that the first medical school graduating class emerged out of the University of Sierra Leone. So the first wave of doctors post-Civil War emerged. Many of them ended up dying during the Ebola outbreak, and schools were closed for 7 months. So the entire country lost 1 entire year of education. Curfews were implemented in major localities. You just couldn't go out. Clearly, restaurants, nightclubs, sports bars closed for months to over 1 year. When we were in Kenema, we quite literally had to make do in terms of bringing our own food because we just couldn't go out for a meal anywhere. Major local transportation is by hired moped. You see here, as you saw in the video. Major long distance transportation is by these very overcrowded vans, buses, or ferries. And it's almost impossible to control the spread of disease when people need to go about their daily life and congregate. This, I think, I took from the top deck of one of the ferries that goes between Lungi and Freetown. You see how overcrowded. The reason why I always stand up there is because one of these days, one of these ferries is just going to sink. And I figure that if I can just, with a running start, pitch myself off at the back of the ferry, I'll probably end up landing in the water and have a better chance of survival, because it's just really a matter of time. Sometimes they cross that strait in these boats that are just these large wooden boats with a single motor, and you can see the sheer number of people that ride them. Markets overcrowded, and these people who ride these mopeds, obviously they are in very close contact with the driver, so that the driver infects them or they infect the driver. This is Kenema City and the peak of the Ebola outbreak. This is Main Street. Actually, our Tulane house starts, it's somewhere down here in the back, and this is the turn that we usually make to go down, and then Kenema Government Hospital is somewhere down there. I don't know if you actually see a single person in this picture, but this is highly unusual versus the normal daily life of Kenema, that is a bustling city. Political impact was widespread. Sierra Leone and Liberia is still recovering from civil wars, which I mentioned, destroy their economies and political climate. And the president of Liberian, Ellen Sirleaf, did make a statement that certainly the Ebola outbreak had caused enough unrest and posed enough of a serious threat to the stability of Liberia that they really had to deploy not just their military, but the US military, as you probably remember, deployed a significant number of soldiers out there, primarily on a peacekeeping mission, because they needed to maintain the stability of the country. The 2014-15 Ebola outbreak shaped the face of politics worldwide. Immigration debates around it, open border policies, ease of importation, the United States and World Health Organization response, mobilization of resources, the lack of therapeutics, vaccines, mobile and adequate public health units and containment units, despite all the money that has been spent over the last 40 years on research and development for Ebola. There was fear and irrational political decisions at the state and federal levels in our country. New Jersey imposed mandatory quarantine on the nurse who returned from treating patients in West Africa. Only 5 airports in the United States became entry points for people who went to West Africa to help with the Ebola outbreak. So I avoided coming through New Jersey at all costs because I did not want Governor Christie to take me and throw me in, some quarter somewhere where I had to stay for 21 days. It was disruptive and it was unnecessary. If I have to make one criticism, is that this Ebola outbreak did not have to happen the way it did and the extent that it did. I'm not at liberty to provide details because that is, I can tell you, an ongoing investigation into the matter. But the Minister of Sierra Leone, Ms. Carbo, you see her picture there, was dismissed from her post following the uncontrolled spread of Ebola in Sierra Leone, led by the decision to not close borders with Guinea based on poor advice. That is really all that I can tell you about, but she was clearly instructed to not close borders because of the social, political, and economic impact that would have on Sierra Leone, and this was going to be a short-lived outbreak that was just going to extinguish itself within a matter of days or weeks. And it was not going to really be impactful. It was going to be fading off into the history books without further ado. And the reality is what we saw. Even Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, who certainly is a very opinionated man, I think he dropped out of the races of this morning, but I actually like the guy because he speaks his mind. And a couple of quotes here. I really think that it's being dominated by political correctness. And I think because of political correctness, we're not really making sound, rational, scientific decisions on this. He said this in reference to statements issued by the CDC assuring that there was little risk of an outbreak occurring in the US. We got lucky. My suspicion is that a lot more transmissible than if people are taking every precaution are getting it. We were getting people on the front lines getting doused with bleach. I never looked so clean because I was cleaning myself every single day, 3-4 times a day with bleach. There are people getting it who simply helped people get in or out of a taxi cab. And it is true. This, very much like influenza, you've got strains that are low pathogenicity but high transmissibility and vice versa. This is what happened with Ebola. Commonly, Ebola is a very highly pathogenic strain, which means it can kill up to 90% or greater of the people it infects, but it's self-contained. Usually these outbreaks that pop, but then very quickly die down. This outbreak was different. This strain was different. It infected many, many, many people, but the mortality rate was about in the 50%, so about, approaching half of what it commonly is. So he was onto something. The people we've lost are the greatest impact. 2 colleagues here, Mohammed Fula, who was one of our lab technicians at the Kenema Government Hospital, and Dr. Sheikh Humar Khan, who has since been heralded a hero in Sierra Leone, worked alongside him many times. When the Ebola outbreak occurred, he basically dedicated himself to the treatment of patients, treated over 100 patients before he himself contracted Ebola and succumbed to it. You can see pictures on the wall with pictures of people and descriptions of who they were and when they perished, posted all over the hospital. They have now since built this memorial to all of the 40 staff that were deceased at the Kenema Government Hospital. And I knew all 40 of them, worked with all 40 of them, and it was absolutely devastating to see these people that have become friends, and certainly you consider many of them, even your family, no longer there. So, almost in closing, here's some of the team. I took this picture when I was there in June. You see everybody's name there. from people who do a lot of the cleaning and maintenance of the wards, to drivers, electricians, outreach teams. We've got some of the US contingent there. We've got, I think that's about it. Yep. So the ones that are still standing look at the future with hope and resiliency. If you want to be an artist who wants to paint a picture of hope and resiliency on a canvas, take a trip to Sierra Leone, park yourself in a corner somewhere in Kenema City and observe. And I think that you've got your muse there. Your canvas will soon, I'm sure, be filled with a very real portray of what hope and resiliency is about. The first survivor of the Ebola outbreak left the hospital on June 8th of 2014. And so on June 8th of 2015, the entire country decided to celebrate that day with a one-year anniversary celebration of the first Ebola survivor. Mambu himself has built quite a resume. He's an Ebola survivor. He was our lab technician for quite a long time. Has his first child born just last year. He's now spending 6 months in the US on a technical training program, seeking his Bachelor of Science at the University of Sierra Leone, and is a potential future Masters of Science or PhD candidate at Tulane University. Mambu is an Ebola survivor, not because he contracted Ebola, fortunately, but because he was misdiagnosed with Ebola. And he was quite literally escorted into the Ebola ward where he fought for his life, very bright young man, and asked his family to just drop as much bleach as they possibly could. And he just spent 3 days spreading bleach around as people quite literally succumbed of Ebola on the floor next to him. So this is the kind of people that we work with. It's the kind of people that we have fought this war with alongside, and look at his face, and that is not a face of a person posing for a picture, is the face of Mambu. It's the face of I am alive, I am glad to be alive, and I look forward to the future. How did the world help? Medical diplomacy, a lot of organizations that just poured in resources and personnel, a lot of money, billions of US dollars, probably untallied, a lot of volunteering, accelerated research and development, reliable diagnostics, vaccines, and therapeutics the world over, just pulled out all the stops and poured a tremendous amount of money into trying to accelerate these developments so that we could actually still have these countermeasures. Infrastructural building, new hospital wards were built, modular laboratories, high containment suites, enhanced transportation, and as possible, roads. There was a commitment, there is a commitment to future surveillance with these point-of-care diagnostics like the ones that our group has developed, and long-term presence by R&D personnel, and also personnel training, of local hospital nurses, doctors, and technicians. Our group launched itself into doing a field validation and obtaining Food and Drug Administration emergency authorization, emergency use authorization, and World Health Organization approval of the RE-EBOV RDT, that stands for Recombinant Ebola Virus Rapid Diagnostic Test for rapid detection of acute Ebola infections. It was the first to be approved, remained the first for quite a while, and this all happened in 7 months. In an era where we often hear about years, if not decades, that it takes to develop anything in the biomedical field, we had a seamless integration of resources, self-look execution focused on the end goal, and our team did this in 7 months from onset of development to FDA, UA, and WHO approval. US and African effort, most probably. I thought when I was a human genome sciences and we developed Abthrax, which was the therapeutic for anthrax, we did it in, I think, 18 months with a company that at the time had a bank account with about $2 billion in it. So resources were not a problem. And as I like to say on bootstrapping, we did it in 7 months. It's probably my proudest professional accomplishment to date. I just want to end by showing you the VHFC consortium, the Viral Hemorrhagic Fever Consortium, is not just a few people here and there. It's a large group of entities that probably totals 100, 150 people. I lost count because it just keeps growing, encompassing universities like Harvard and Broad Institute and Boston University and Massachusetts, and University of San Diego, and the Scripps Research Institute, as well as Tulane University and University of Texas Medical Branch down south, Corgenix Medical Corporation, Autoimmune Technologies, Zalgen Labs, and Nanomics are corporate entities that actually bring a lot of these products to market. So once things get out of research and development, you got to actually put them into a development and commercialization pipeline. And of course, our partners in Sierra Leone, at the Kenma Government Hospital, and at the Redeemers University and the Arua Specialist Teaching Hospital in Nigeria, that provide a lot of the support and permit our presence there to actually go test these products and these endemic areas. It is very crucial that we acknowledge one of the most brilliant minds, most amazing individuals that you could ever hope to meet, and that's Dr. Robert Francis Gary Jr. He is the principal investigator of this consortium and proudly my co-founder at Zalgen Labs, is a man who's just basically has built this from the ground up. Very proud to be his partner, and right now he's in Sierra Leone helping to put up solar panels and the new Lassa Fever ward and wiring the panels into the battery banks so that we can have a brand new Lassa Fever ward here online in the next quarter or so that is badly needed. Thank you for listening.